Hello, my name is Ian. Today we're talking about Wolfgang Mieder's Politics is Not a Spectator Sport, Proverbs in the Personal and Political Writings of Hillary Rodham Clinton. Wolfgang Mieder he's the guy. He is the Proverbs scholar. He has written over 200 books and countless, literally, almost literally countless articles. He is a perenniologist. He is if not the expert in the proverb in English, in American English in particular, in German as well. And he teaches at the University of Vermont. And he is not only that, he is also an incredibly sweet and kind and nice and wonderful person. He's been interested in the proverb in politics for a number of years. He's done works on the use of proverbs by Churchill, by Lincoln, by Hitler. He's currently going through the last paper I read of his. He was giving it at the American Folklore Society last year, and it was Hermann Goering's diaries, and they've just released the complete, unedited, uncondensed version of them, and he's been going through piece by piece. And it's a brutal piece of work because one of the things that he is showing is the remarkable facility that certain politicians have with tapping into the sort of the spirit of a people, as it were, Volksgeist, I guess, by an intelligent and creative use of proverb. So, for those who don't know or want sort of the quick pat version, what is a proverb? Well, a proverb is a piece of conventionalized wisdom. It is something that exists within groups, within nations, within subcultures, no less, as well. But basically, an idea, a semantic context. It's usually some kind of couched in some kind of metaphor. It often is stylized in a way. It has an internal rhyme or internal rhythm to it. It is noticeable in terms of it being a tiny little piece of verbal art as well. And it contains some kind of convention, some kind of understanding that can then be used. Because we don't want to simply talk about proverbs as items. We want to understand that proverbs really only have reveal their purpose, their strength, their leverage, and sometimes misuse, or rather use to ill ends, when they are actually invoked, when someone reminds you of a proverb. Because what a proverb does is it frames a particular, either an answer, if you ask me a question and I answer with sort of a proverbial piece of wisdom, or if I weave a number of proverbs into a piece of writing or a piece of oratory. We have the idea that I am not simply speaking my opinion. I am reminding you of the already received wisdom of the group. And that what I am saying is, more than anything, a reminder of established, settled matters. And it is proverbial, it is metaphorical, it is open to interpretation. There is a certain ambiguity there, which allows us to be remarkably creative. It also, because they are fixed, we can do what is referred to as the anti-proverb, where we can change a word here or there, and it makes reference. You need to understand the proverbial thing that is being, from which a variation is taking place, in order for you to fully understand the impact of what is being said. So, he's turning his eye on Hillary Clinton, and this is written in 2015, so she had just announced her second and ultimately, as you know, unsuccessful bid for the presidency. She did become the Democratic nominee. That was not assured by the time this was written. And Mieder is clearly not necessarily a supporter but certainly someone who admires Clinton in terms of her capacity, in terms of her writing style, and I believe in terms of her political orientation as well. So you can ask whether that is appropriate or not. I think disguising one's inclinations is more illegitimate than putting them on the page. Considering that it's not a panegyric to Clinton. It also points out some of at least the things that make her a problematic candidate in terms of potentially sort of a flippant, occasionally sort of flippant responses, or a couple of things. So he's not wholly, he's clearly on her side, but he is not a naive adherent of Clinton's. I don't think he's a fan of Bill. That being said, he also notices, and one of the things that it's clear in reading her speeches, and what he points out, is that, as many people have said, she is not prone to proverb in her speeches. She will use them on occasion, and use them quite effectively. But she is not a naturally proverbial speaker. She does not naturally invoke them, in large part, and this is probably more than anything a consequence of just baseline misogyny and patriarchy, that she does not want to open herself up to charges of ambiguity, that proverbs and using metaphorical language is often a way of being a certain amount of florid and a certain amount of emotional, which are praiseworthy characteristics until you are looking for something to damn someone with, particularly a female candidate, at which point they can lead over to exposure. So she is almost embarrassingly precise and unambiguous in how she speaks most of the time, especially when many of her, certainly her speeches when she was Secretary of State, were directed at an international crowd, and so it wasn't. So it's a time when the bringing proverbs in, like sort of, weaving a proverbial expression into a piece of writing, introduces that ambiguity, because you don't know if your audience will know the reference. And proverbs are linguistically based. Occasionally you'll come across analogs, but certainly they are one of the they're metaphorical. They're a whole host of conventionalized understandings that may or may not be translatable in the same way, and may not, a second language speaker might not get the reference. So you want to avoid that. That being said, there are many, many times when she will use a proverb, but she will say, as the saying goes, as we say in America, or as Mieder says later on in this chapter, she will use international proverbs and bring them into her speech, whether in general, whether to an American audience, or when she is speaking in China, she uses a Chinese proverb, and so on, to demonstrate that kind of bringing it in. But she's also very clear. I am now speaking proverbially, as opposed to other politicians who might sort of do it without framing what they say as proverb. But what she does do is she uses it in her writing. Again, sometimes telegraphing. What is the word we're looking for? The idea that she is engaged in proverbial speech. But her written text is much more affective. It's much more. It's much less concise and cool as her speeches are. It is quite warm and inviting. And he starts off. One of the things to bear in mind with Wolfgang is that he is exhaustive because he is making a point. So this is a very long reading, and he basically wants to take it, as the proverb says, from soup to nuts, and demonstrate her facility, themes that emerge over time. And one of the ones is the idea, an overarching theme that comes out in her, both in her first book, It Takes a Village, which the title of which is also a proverb, which she gets to in a minute, or proverb, which she gets to towards the end, and in Living History, where she is demonstrating how one of the ways that she was raised was through adverting to proverbs that her parents explicitly told her. Proverbs or proverbial expressions. And so the sort of the Protestant Puritan ethics of her background were imposed as much through these two looming figures of her parents who could dispense proverbial wisdom. The lessons men and women have learned over thousands of years are available to anyone in the form of fables, stories, poems, plays, proverbs, and scriptures that have stood the test of time. And that's from It Takes a Village itself. And so she's already suggesting that within this very content, she's suggesting that it is through Proverbs that much of the world is oriented. She's very adept at scriptural references, in large part portraying an actual Christian faith and Christian orientation and immersion in Scripture, and in part understanding an audience that would understand the world through scriptural purposes. So you can make an argument that maybe if she's more gearing it towards trying to win over a specific audience, that she is being disingenuous, or conversely, that she is basically not signaling, not cueing, but demonstrating in a positive way, or positive way depending on how you think about the Christian message, that she is oriented in that way. But by making these allusions to scriptural proverbs, she is demonstrating a participation in that culture. Then again, she often will say, locating it within, as the scripture says. So it is not the telling it slight. It is not the dropping of a proverbial hint. She is clear to frame it. She also will typically, not typically, that's the wrong word, but she will often also allude to proverbial wisdom without necessarily citing it in full. So she will, like the life hands you lemons, make lemonades one, that's, she can sort of incorporate it, rework it, not in an anti-proverb sort of way, but just rework it so that the allusion to life and lemons and lemonade are mentioned, but basically the proverb is sort of, as it were, fractured and placed within a larger sentence. She is willing to not simply use age-old proverbs, but proverbial expressions that have emerged in the past 20 years, including some from her cohort. James Carville's It's the Economy, Stupid. She will reference that over and over again. It demonstrates that Proverbs, one of the reasons that this is a great reading is that it is using one person who has a broad audience, who has different audiences, and who has a very large public record through which one can through which one can pull out the use of proverbs and demonstrate all the various ways that any speaker uses proverbs or can potentially use proverbs. So the fact that there are modern ones in her repertoire, ones that are coined as of late, like James Carville's It's the Economy, Stupid, and as sort of these little invocations, basically the idea that there has been, I don't want to use the idea twice, but the premise is that there has been an idea that has been expressed so well that to seek out an original way of doing it is actually a redundancy, in large part because that is just a reduplication of effort without necessarily a reduplication of the efficacy of it. Rather, by quoting either through allusion or non-citation, quoting someone without necessarily saying this, as they say, or as this person said, or just coming out and using it, or even breaking it up. They are locating themselves explicitly or implicitly within this train of thought that is already established in the group and is already established within the larger context. Arguably, she has also come up with her own ones, most particularly the idea of the encapsulation. It's not necessarily the pithiest of Proverbs, but it is something that demonstrates one of the great ideas of Proverbs, in that it is an expression that condenses a thought down to its essential elements. It uses parallelism, it uses repetition of, at least of patterning, which is basically what I mean when I talk about parallelism, and it is memorable enough that other people start to use it, and that is the human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. So you have that, I mean, you can see that on a meme with the exact same font and then, repeated below it. Repeated below it with women and human replaced, and it's effective, and it's effective in that the entire speech, he quotes the long speech in which it emerges, where she basically spells it out. She lays the factual elements, or at least the rhetorical points within that large argument that leads up to the proverbial conclusion, or the proverbial-esque conclusion, human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights, to the point where that is really all you need to abstract from that particular speech. And that was at a women's rights convention in Beijing in the late 1990s, and it one of sort of the pivotal moments that fundamentally launched her not simply as a prominent international figure by virtue of being a very active first lady, but one with an agenda that could be taken further and beyond that term of first lady and into actual sort of legislative capacity herself. She also, probably more than anyone, has if not necessarily popularized, at least made use of the rhetorical proverbial expression of breaking the glass ceiling in both her efforts at the presidency. She did it, she mentions it in the concession speech. It wasn't really a concession speech, it was the nomination speech for Obama in 2008. Subsequent to this, it was certainly a theme at the Democratic Convention in 2016 in the shattering, when she actually became the candidate, and so the first woman candidate for president of one of the major parties. But this use of the shattering of the glass ceiling becomes a part of the campaign, to the point where allusions to that proverb are used in NGOs and certain service organizations that she participates in order to help women get into politics. As I said, she will often use proverbs from outside the culture, again, demonstrating, particularly in her role as Secretary of State, demonstrating a tactic of trying to communicate within the worldview of the people to whom she needs to convince or apply rhetorical flourishes. Conversely, she can bring it back, but by alluding to it, as they say in China, as they say in Africa, by framing it as a saying or a proverb, and she uses the words potentially interchangeably. She is addressing the idea that this is an interesting expression that nevertheless has some gravitas and some import, in part because it has circulation within an esteemed tradition. Because it has carried this group through, we can potentially learn by it. But most importantly, it is not me saying this. It is a collective saying it. And proverbs are an interconnection between the individual and the collective. They are performances of collectivity. They are performances of reminding people that we exist within not simply geographical communities or linguistic communities, but communities that are oriented based on common sense understanding of how the world actually operates, on common sense understandings of pieces of advice, and so on. And I use common sense in a loose term, but that when I use this piece of wisdom, when I use this expression, whether it is of my community or whether I advert to the fact that it's someone else's community, I am locating my words within this larger flow. I am speaking up momentarily and reminding you, and thereby drawing attention towards what I have to say through reminding you of this collective experience. And so, again, the individual and the collective unite in this use of proverb. So she shows remarkable facility with them. Not the flourishes that others have. You can legitimately critique Clinton for not necessarily being the most dynamic speaker off the cuff either. But in her writing, which is considered and intelligent and much more prone to expressing sentiment and even expressing things like doubt and interiority far more than she is in public. Her use of proverbs sort of demonstrates that remarkable facility. It is unfair to compare her to people like, as a speaker, it's unfair to compare her to people like Clinton and Bill Clinton, her husband, or Barack Obama, or Lincoln, or even like John F. Kennedy, who I think geared up most of their lives to be pivot points between the intellectual understanding that they bring to a situation and the sort of the podium. She, in part, again, probably because of the way that the use of proverb, as much as is an invocation, it does potentially expose one to ambiguity when ambiguity can be used as a cudgel against you. She's loath to do that unless she can really lay it out and really say, as the saying goes, and really telegram it. But nevertheless, the article, Mieder's work, demonstrates this even if you take one step back and stop merely considering Clinton, it just becomes this wonderful recent example of the role that proverb has in communication and in understanding. So, I cannot say enough good things about Wolfgang Mieder in general, and certainly in this specific instance. So, as ever, my friends, my name is Ian. I have been talking to you about Wolfgang Mieder's Politics is Not a Spectator Sport, Proverbs in the Personal and Political Writings of Hillary Rodham Clinton. As ever, I wish you nothing but the best. Be well, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.